Ghent made its fortune in the textile trade and for a while was fabulously wealthy. The citizens here could afford to build churches, canals, guild halls, and fancy private homes. Over time, that trade did collapse. All of Flanders was involved in a long tug of war, not just for economic domination, but for cultural domination between the French, the English, the Germans, and even the Spanish. That conflict lives on in the divide between Flemish speakers and French speakers here in Belgium, and we'll see some examples of that during our walk. The city escaped most of the physical damage that you see all over France from World War I and World War II. However, its art has always been the object not just of envy, but also of outright theft. Today the city is filled with friendly, mostly multilingual people and is welcoming for a day trip. Let's take a look.
Hello and welcome back to the Armchair Traveler. My name is Judy. I love to travel. I do this on my own, and so can you. I'm here to teach you how. The city's main square is called the Korenmarkt, which means wheat market. This square dates back almost to the establishment of the city, when Ghent was the center of the grain trade for what was then the county of Flanders. Grain was brought into the city via the nearby canals and sold here. That's St. Nicholas Church in the background, peeping out from behind the facade of the Korenmarkt. This is the repurposed former post office. The building only looks antique. It actually dates from about 1910. The city established itself where two rivers blended together, suitably filled in. The citizens and planners retained and expanded a canal system which was by far the easiest way to transport almost everything in the Middle Ages. Those fancy-looking houses you see in this photograph were guild halls, meeting places for the town's boatmen, grain traders, and weighers. In the far distance, beyond the crane, you can see the Gravenstein Castle. In the 14th century, Gravenstein was no longer considered a suitable residence for the Count of Flanders. I suppose it wasn't fancy enough, and of course styles do change. The Count in those days moved to a townhouse in this general neighborhood. Ghent was a good-sized city in the Middle Ages and had several churches, although I only visited 2 of them on this trip. St. Nicholas, shown in this photograph, was built mostly during Ghent's boom period. The blue-gray limestone you see on the front facade is called Schelt. It was mined and used when the builders could afford the very best. The photo of the side of the building gives a great view of the progression in the use of materials that masons had to resort to as the town's fortunes declined. On the far left you see the blue Schelt. Next came the yellow sandstone, which meant this section was built probably between 1400 and 1500 when the economy was still strong but slowing. Eventually the builders were forced to switch to red brick when the economy went into the tank. Like almost all surviving medieval construction, this one is substantially below modern ground level. The interior of St. Nicholas dates from an even later period than the construction, typically from the 1600s. When the Protestant Reformation took hold here in the Low Countries, it wasn't just religious belief that was changed or how one worshipped, but how the building interiors were supposed to look. The Baroque Rococo columns that you see here on either side of the altar are late, but as gaudy as they might appear, they reflect the relative poverty of the city by that time. They're made of painted wood, not marble. This is a picture of the cloth hall, an essential feature of every cloth trading city. The cloth hall dates from 1425 and was the gathering place for wool and cloth merchants. It sits on City Market Square, which is a big urban renewal project. The city decided to turn that parking lot in front of the old city market into a public space. They built a huge wood-roofed covered area that I really didn't like since it blocked my view of the market. When I walked through on a Saturday, there were a lot of young families spending time there. I might not have liked it, but at least some of the people who live nearby do. The belfry sits between St. Bavo's Cathedral and St. Nicholas Church, but it didn't have anything to do with the churches. It was a symbol of the city's autonomy. They began building it in 1313 and completed it in 1380. The spire, which is basically the clock on up, is a later addition dating from the World's Fair in 1913. There's a dragon on top, the proud symbol and mascot of the city. This is a better view of the dragon. It watches over the city and never sleeps.
Here's a view of that pavilion I mentioned. The pavilion got a lot of criticism when it was unveiled in 2012, but at least it's interesting. It tries to represent the old Ghent in a modern and not very discreet way. I suppose that's what the wood is all about.
St. Bavo's Square was a symbolic battleground between Belgium's Dutch-speaking and French-speaking factions during the 1800s and early 1900s. At the time, Belgium was dominated by a French-speaking bourgeoisie, although Dutch-speakers were in the majority. This is the facade of St. Bavo's, home not just to the Ghent altarpiece, although I suspect everyone who comes here to see that first, as did I, but a considerable collection of other art. Construction began around 1274. Later on, between the 14th and 16th centuries, it was under continuous construction. It has also been under intermittent threat. For example, in the summer of 1566, roving bands of Calvinist iconoclasts came and shattered the stained glass windows, smashed the statues, and destroyed paintings and other artworks that they thought promoted idol worship. Fortunately, the altarpiece by the Van Eycks was saved. Since there is so much to learn from the cathedral, I am covering it in a separate video blog. I passed by this building, which was the Masons' Guild House. It's been here since the 1400s, but for centuries the facade that you see now is covered up with a brick facing. That was only revealed in 1976 when they were doing some repairs and the renovators removed the wall. During the renovation, they added 6 statues of twirling dancers to the top. I wasn't too crazy about those dancers, which I assume come under the heading of artistic license. I suppose no one really knew what was there originally. It's now home to a place called Otako's, which, if you read the reviews back in 2019, was doomed to failure. At the time, the only reviewer had this one question: why do they call it tacos when it's just French fries in ketchup stuffed in a wrap? There wasn't a good answer then, and there isn't a good answer now, except perhaps the locals are crazy for anything that even sounds like Mexican food. I was astonished to learn that the place is still in business. The lovely Dutch theater you see here was built in 1899. It has been celebrated ever since because it marked the official return of the use of spoken Flemish in a theater here in Flanders. For a very long time, the use of Flemish was actively discouraged by the Belgian government, which preferred French. The style of this rather muscular pair reminds me more of Soviet realism than anything else, but in fact the pair is celebrating the resurrection of the Dutch language. The statue sits right in front of the Dutch theater. Notice the lion, which is a symbol of Flanders, on their flag. Sometime before 1300, a town was established here in Flanders near the French border called Seklen. In 1338, an English army invaded the territory and burnt down that town and the villages around it. That year, one of the families, named Van der Sikkelen, relocated to Ghent and built 3 large stone houses. You can see them here. This family prospered, and it long enjoyed political and social prestige and owned the buildings downtown here near the cathedral. You can see in the photograph that there are several different buildings in the plot. The high, round, white tower was built using sandlime brick instead of red brick, perhaps because they wanted it to stand out. Beyond it to the left, and unfortunately out of this photo, is a brick tower that is the oldest part of the complex. Another of the buildings behind this white tower was erected in the 15th and 16th centuries and now is home to a music conservatory. Ghent City Hall is a rather sturdy-looking 4-sided complex. The main wings are late Gothic style. Those empty niches you can see in the front right corner of my photograph were originally meant to contain statues of the Counts of Flanders. While most of the building does date from the early 1500s, there's a cellar on one side that is said to date all the way back to the 1100s. This seemingly messy area is a practical solution to a big social problem. Rather than outlawing graffiti entirely and trying to round up the perpetrators, the police have designated this one street to give would-be artists a legal controlled space to ply their trade. Here are 2 more views of Graffiti Street. I do not recall seeing any spray paint anywhere else in the downtown area, so perhaps the idea actually worked. I'm pretty sure if anyone tried to knock down any of these buildings, the paint would probably stand up on its own. I'm not even going to attempt pronouncing the name of this pretty square, but I found out the name means Friday Market. The gent in the statue is Jacob van Artevelde. He's sometimes known as the Wise Man or the Brewer of Ghent. Jacob was born into a wealthy family here in the city, and he spent most of his life adding to that wealth. He should probably be better known as a powerful and persuasive politician, but as with so many politicians over time, it was complicated. Flemish relations with England in the 14th century had traditionally been good due to wool and textile trade. Ghent got caught, unfortunately, between France, which controlled the city, and England, which provided it with the wool. Jacob's goal was neutrality, for the very good reason that wars were bad for business. He managed to broker an agreement with Ypres and Ghent to help guarantee that neutrality. Flemish trade and industry flourished under his semi-dictatorial rule until the day someone, it's not certain who, decided they would be better off without him. He was accused of embezzlement and probably more, and was executed by an angry mob. After that, I suspect he was forgotten. Fast forward centuries and opinions change. You'll recall the difficulty Dutch speakers in Flanders had in preserving their language and theater. Jacob's memory was resurrected during the nationalism of the late 19th and early 20th centuries as a symbol of the Flemish people, asserting their independence from the French speakers. They even put up this statue to prove it. Patershol is a cozy medieval neighborhood close to the Gravenstein Castle, which we'll see next. It's actually a rabbit warren of streets and a very easy place to get lost. I've been told it's now one of Ghent's most desirable neighborhoods, although doubtless for a long time it was not. These two buildings are among the most camera-worthy in the area. The Gravenstein means Castle of the Counts in the Dutch language. The current castle dates from about 1180 and was the residence of the Counts of Flanders until 1353, when they moved to a better location in Prinsenhof. Castles like this are extremely sturdy but not very comfortable, and they're expensive to build. They're also extremely expensive to tear down, which may be why some of them have survived. The castle has subsequently been repurposed as a court, a prison, a mint, and for a while in the 19th century as a cotton factory. It was restored between 1893 and 1903 and is now a museum and a landmark here in the city. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this video interesting or helpful, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to my channel. It's free to you, but it will help the channel grow. Travel sites and history can be word-heavy, especially background information, so some of my video blogs have companion pieces with more for you. There are also pieces which don't make it into video format at all. You can check them out on my WordPress blog site. The address is armchairtraveler2022.wordpress.com. If you'd like to keep up when I post new blogs or video blogs, or are interested in tweet-sized posts, follow me on Twitter. My handle there is @armchair2022. I will tweet updates for new posts, and when I begin traveling again, will take you along in short form on Twitter.